Welcome to the Bookers Alliance podcast, where we hold the pencil and the pencil is power. Coming at you right now is your host, Marky Mark, along with the man, the myth, the legend, Frank Donaldson. Join us as we discuss the ever-changing landscape of professional wrestling. So hang on tight, you jabronis, and enjoy the ride. Hey, welcome in, everybody. Thank you for joining today's episode of the Bookers Alliance podcast. Today is a celebration, Frank. A celebration.
Right.
On two different fronts.
Absolutely. We're going to celebrate us, and we're going to celebrate one of the greatest superstars of the modern era that we're going to enjoy talking about today. So it's going to be a celebration all around.
Celebration. So we are hitting our 50th episode as the Bookers Alliance podcast. Who knew? Who knew? I'm telling you,
a lot of podcasts don't make it 5 episodes. We're trying to strive for longevity here. So 50 is just the first landmark.
So we wanted to celebrate this moment, but also the topic for today's episode. We don't want to be too somber about it, but we want to be respectful. But today's episode, we're going to pay respects to the life and times of Mr. Windham Rotunda, Mr. Bray Wyatt.
Also known as Bray Wyatt, absolutely. So we're going to have a celebration of life for his career is while we're celebrating our achievement here.
And what would be a celebration, sir, without some whiskey?
Well, I mean, that's just kind of is what it is. That's par for the course on us. But, we pour one out for a lost brother as well as pour one out to celebrate today. So, we're gonna make a thing out of it here. So
absolutely. So
tell us about our product for today, kind sir.
So not a sponsor. Wish they would though. So come on.
If you guys want to be though, when you hear your names mentioned, please feel free to let us know. Reach out all our social media.
So today's whiskey selection is Angel's Envy. How appropriate this would be to celebrate somebody that has passed on into the heavenly upstairs. We wanted to pour this in remembrance of Mr. Windham Rotunda, but also at the same time pour it in celebration of ourselves. So
gotta pour out a little liquor.
Absolutely. So we'll get a little flow in here.
There you go.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Frank, cheers to the
50th anniversary.
Absolutely,
right.
Sir. Absolutely. Good old Angel's Envy port wine finished whiskey, American whiskey there. Beautiful flavors, great product. Highly suggest if you're into the whiskey scene, pick you up some of that. That's some good stuff.
Definitely my first time having it, nice and thick. Went down pretty smooth. I can't complain about that.
We still talking about the whiskey?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Had to ask.
Yeah, we got previous conversations that we were having, joking around with some of the female listeners of our podcast here. So just carrying that on over in. But yeah, we have to keep that PG, so we can't let you guys know any more about it.
No. That's the After Dark podcast.
There you go. All right. Busted Open has an After Dark. Bookers Alliance can do an After Dark too.
All right, so let's get on into our topic today. Paying our respects to Windham Rotunda, a.k.a. Bray Wyatt, a.k.a. The Fiend, a.k.a. Husky Harris.
Hey, Husky Harris. Good Lord. Are we going to talk about that today?
Absolutely, man. Let's break that down because that's where this journey all starts.
Very true. I mean, that was the first time WWE fans got their first taste of Windham Rotunda is Husky Harris. And you look at where he ended, and then you look back at where he started. My goodness, can you talk about like the tale of two cities right there?
That was crazy difference in the character development. And of course, we're going to break that all down and get into that miraculous journey that he had. But starting out, Husky Harris came up through NXT, kind of
FCW, Florida Championship Wrestling into NXTs.
Yeah. But Husky Harris, that was... forgive me if I'm wrong, but the first remembrance that I'm having of seeing him was with the Nexus group.
So he did the NXT show. Remember, they had the first reality show where they were like, on TV kind of competing for jobs, and they were doing like it was kind of like the challenge, like the Real World Challenge, where they were doing like, different challenges every week. And like a lot of wrestlers you would still know now. Wade Barrett was in that class. Yep. Brian Danielson was in that class. There were some others, that may or may not have made it further along in the business, but those
Jennifer Hudson's husband was in there, right?
Yep, yeah, David Otunga, yeah,
David
he was in that
Otunga,
class. Justin Gabriel, he was in that class. I mean, there were a lot of people that carried on in. Even Heath Slater, he got kids. He was in there. A lot of people came out of there, but I'll be honest, running through the names that we just ran through, at any level, did you think Husky Harris would probably be the biggest standout WWE produced out of that group?
No, and I think that's attributed to the man himself, Windham. He was able to notice that, okay, maybe this character isn't working.
Yeah.
He at one point, as the legend goes, McMahon kind of put a squash on the Husky Harris character, and he looked him dead in the eye and he said, I'll be back.
Yeah.
This ain't the last you've seen of me.
Well, upside of what he did, he was willing to go back down to, quote unquote, down to NXT, go kind of backtrack. He was on the main roster. He was in a major storyline. Nexus was working with John Cena. And, so he was main event at that. Now, was he ready for main events? No. But he was there. He was at the big show. He was against the biggest wrestler. Anybody who actually remembers John Cena beat like the whole Nexus in one night, put, all 7 members down in one night. So, I mean, that essentially buried those guys. And, a guy like Husky Harris at the time could have looked at this and said, this is for the birds. I'm out of here. With the TNA, he could have went to, whatever other option, we hit the indie scene. He could have just said, hey, screw this. I'm out of here. I'm done. They treated me like this. And, I'm a legacy member, 3rd generation, superstar. Grandfather did a lot of work in the business. His father was a producer in the business at the time. And they still kind of trashed him. He could have said, I'm out of here. I'm done. But he didn't. He said, hey, you know what? I'm out. I may be out of here on the main show, but that doesn't mean I won't be back. Like you just said, he said, I'll be back. And in what a way did he come back?
Yeah, so he came back after he dropped the Husky Harris character, comes back as a character that was a little bit spooky, a little bit mysterious, but yet at the same time, a little bit cult leader, a little bit psychologist, if you will.
Yeah. I like the look of the gimmick to the Duck Dynasty deal, where they kind of look like those Duck Dynasty swamp guys,
Louisiana swamp.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They kind of had that, but his character, was a lot more detailed than obviously the leader of Duck Dynasty. He was more, like you said, he had that supernatural thing, he had that psychological thing. He had a lot of different facets to his character, and he was able to graduate, Harper and Rowan and later on Braun Strowman through that family gimmick. These were other guys that weren't making it on the main roster. Definitely Vince-looking guys. They're both almost 7 foot tall, all 300 pounds. They could both work. So they definitely had that Vince look, but for some reason or another, they weren't on the main roster either. So, time in there with Bray Wyatt, now all 3 of them have careers worth of note.
So, of course, we're talking about the Wyatt family, which was the faction that formed based off of Bray Wyatt kind of being this cult leader, a psychological battle, if you will. He picked up some traits from The Undertaker as far as he tried to psych you out before you got into the match.
Yeah.
He was trying to beat you before the match even started.
Yeah, with the backward spider crawl thing and, just some of the ways he would talk to you. I heard somebody else say it the other day. They were talking about Bray and they mentioned how he had that same way of speaking as Jake the Snake Roberts, where instead of coming at the promo where he's going to yell at you and he's going to tell you what I'm going to do and, what are you going to do, brother, and brother, and all this stuff. He just had one of those, I'm going to talk real low. I'm going to bring you in.
Pulled you close.
And before you know it, you were entranced in what he was saying because of how you were listening to it. You're just, you're in-depthly listening to what he was saying. And it carries a different tone to that type of promo.
Yep. So the promos when he was Bray Wyatt, it was very unique. Like you said, very kind of just that you would see the 3 faces at the Wyatt family with Luke Harper and Eric Rowan. Luke Harper also he's going on, so we'll pay respects to him, as we roll through this. But definitely, I remember seeing Bray in the rocking chair, in the swampy atmosphere with the promos, or whether it be the misty background with him carrying the lantern. He had this way of just talking to you in riddles to make you think.
Yeah.
Like, what is he really saying? Now, granted, that could have backfired. That could have been Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, and if there was nowhere to go with the riddle, at the end of it, if you realize he was just as confused as you were, then you're in trouble. At that point, you're like, okay, so what are we doing here right now? But he had a method to his madness.
Yep.
When he would start that promo, he would always wrap it up where he needed it to go. If it was character development, if it was storyline development, if it was to develop one of his other family members, he had an end game that he was working to. And no matter what twists and turns he took you through on that path, you ended up where you needed to be.
But talk about a 180 in character development from Husky Harris to Bray Wyatt.
Yeah.
Complete 180. And then it only evolved from there as he went through the Wyatt family. And then again, Braun Strowman kind of came in to the fold. So you had this massive just faction in the Wyatt family led by this cult leader, Bray Wyatt. Different iterations of Bray Wyatt, even through that phase. You kind of had the Eater of Worlds. You had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre-esque, where he'd come out a couple of
Storytime Bray, where he would, where he'd come out there and sing and got the whole world in his hands and just sit there and let the crowd just sing it.
One of the freakiest moments that I will ever remember about his character was his match with John Cena, where all of those kids surrounded the ring singing. He's got the whole world in his hands, and I'm going, that's some freaky crap right there.
And so rewind again to back to what we were saying. Would you ever put Husky Harris in a WrestleMania match with John Cena?
Absolutely not.
So it just goes
happened though.
Husky Harris.
So
we got there
later on.
In a funny way. In a weird way, we did get there. But just looking at like 2011 Bray and then saying, you would have been in that. No, he would not have been in that. No. There's no way. It wasn't going to happen under that first moniker.
Yep. So the Bray Wyatt character in the Wyatt family went through different iterations, also went through very different storylines. One in particular that I remember was with Daniel Bryan.
Yeah.
Daniel Bryan getting pulled into the Wyatt family faction. He was playing psychological games with him, trying to toy with, him being in there. And then it was the Yes movement that kept Bryan from going into the family.
Remember, they had him in the jumpsuit. Yep. He was working tags with him. He was the fourth member before Braun got there. Yep. He was that was his thing. He was just in it. And I remember the same as you, they had a cage match and they had them in there wrestling. And I remember Bryan peeled off the jumpsuit in the cage match because, the other Wyatt family members were out and it was just supposed to be him and Bray in there. And he was just letting Bray just do whatever he wanted to him because, Bray was the leader and he was subservient to him. And, something twisted in Bryan's head. And he said, you know what? Not going to do this anymore. And he rejected it, came out there. And he unleashed a flurry on Bray Wyatt, ended up winning the cage match. And like you said, at the end of it, I remember he was sitting on the cage doing the yeses, and that's pretty much where the yes movement started.
Yep.
So, we talk about, and we're going to talk more about as we go on, the way Bray Wyatt launched like these different careers and the different trajectories than what they may have been doing already. This is just the first instance. He took Daniel Bryan, who they were looking, the upper management or whatever looked at as, just that mid-card, what Stephanie called a B-plus player.
Right.
He got into a program with Bray Wyatt and came out of it all the better. And that is something, again, we'll talk about as we go on, but that's something that Bray had a great quality for. He could bring you into his story, even though Daniel Bryan was a bigger star than Bray Wyatt at that particular time. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade a spade. They may have started at the same time, but Bryan had way more experience. He was way more seasoned in the business than Bray Wyatt was. But he was able to bring Daniel Bryan into his storyline, completely erase what we had known about Daniel Bryan up to that point, almost help recreate him within his own storyline and then send him off to go achieve whatever heights he wanted to. He won world championships after his storyline with Bray Wyatt. He went on to, continue to main event, different WrestleManias, things like that.
Yep.
All of it kind of was off that trajectory of working with Bray Wyatt. I mean, that was a young Bray Wyatt when it happened. So,
and y'all remember too, as we're talking about Bray Wyatt, he was only around for a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, as far as tenure, longevity, and all that, I mean, he got what, maybe 6 WrestleManias under his belt. Take away the time that he was released, which we'll get into all that too. So I mean, he. As far as like some of the big names that we talk about in the business, yeah, he doesn't have the track record of those guys just because he wasn't in long enough. But he left just such an indelible mark in the little bit of time he was there.
I feel like everybody that he worked with or just promoted with or just was in any storyline with, it was so impactful for every little thing that he did. And that is where we want to talk about the genius of Bray Wyatt.
Yeah.
Such a creative person, a creative character, and transitioning into one of the most creative characters we've probably ever seen outside of The Undertaker.
Yeah.
Is The Fiend.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the Fiend was, if you took everything that Bray Wyatt was trying to tell us about, all of the hell and damnation, all of the pain and suffering, everything, and you embodied it into a character, you got The Fiend.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, and he played off the whole Jekyll and Hyde deal, and he was the nice guy in the Mr. Rogers sweater and, in the fun house and, playing with puppets and blah, blah, blah. But then, at the end of almost every one of those vignettes, there would be a turn. Something would happen. There would be a turn where he would just remind you, I'm still that guy.
Yeah.
That I'm still that Hellraiser. I'm still that, I'm still that swamp guy. But then there's this other guy.
Yeah.
You don't want to see that other guy.
You don't want to see him.
Oh.
And he would beg us the question, let him in.
Let him in.
Let him in.
Because he knew, underneath the surface, he knew once they let him in, once they let him in, there was no stopping him.
No.
And it turned out to be correct.
Yep.
The only way they could stop him after they let him in was to send him out because there was no stopping what he had created. And I mean, his creative juices were just so fluid that you almost had to rein it in a little bit because, there were so many different facets of, twists and turns that could have went down that character that, a writing team can't necessarily keep up with an individual's creativity.
No, and also the way that his creative ideas were flowing, you also got to remember pacing along TV events and PLEs and things like that. You can't exactly get to where you're going as fast as you want to get to sometimes. And I'm sure, that probably frustrated him, as creative as he was. But with the Fiend character, the way that they did that, like you said, the Jekyll and Hyde, you had the Funhouse Bray.
Yep.
And, Funhouse Bray might actually be my favorite iteration of Bray Wyatt.
Definitely could be. It definitely could be up there. I really like the Duck Dynasty Bray, so, that kind of lived in my... But, yeah, the Funhouse Bray, I mean, we definitely saw a different side of his personality, like his individual personality. He definitely introduced us to a whole new side of his character because I mean
and characters.
Yeah, because the what he did in the original Bray Wyatt, in the Wyatt family, even to the Fiend, almost translates a little bit, because he was that dark, quote unquote supernatural character. Then the Fiend was kind of the same thing, but that Mr. Rogers Bray, I mean, that was so far out of the wheelhouse of his particular style of character, you would never associate him with that at all. I mean, then even as we talk, the way he brought in Alexa Bliss to the storyline, the way he brought in Randy Orton, he did 2 different stints with Randy Orton.
Yep.
One in the Wyatt family, one as the Fiend. But I mean, those were characters that were at some point more over than him.
Yeah.
When they were all in there together, Randy Orton was a multi-time world champion at that point. Alexa Bliss, multi-time women's champion at that point. Those characters were more over than him, but they even took a rub off of his storyline again.
Absolutely.
Because he didn't come in and start becoming the legend killer. He didn't come in and start being like Alexa's bodyguard. They played into his story.
Yep.
So his story is what carried superstars and let them go on to higher heights again. So same kind of as with Daniel Bryan, he took a guy that didn't really need the rub and gave him a rub, and that, to be able to say you did that again when you're only 4, 5, 6 years into the game, that gives credit beyond to that character and that person.
So Funhouse Bray and The Fiend, those were like total extreme ends, opposite ends of the spectrum for Bray Wyatt. You had The Fiend, which was every embodiment of just evil,
Pure
hate.
evil.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you had the Funhouse Bray, which was happy-go-lucky Bray, but still with that undertone of psychosis.
You knew there was something. You knew there was something off in there.
And that to me, that was why that was my favorite.
Yeah,
because that was the point, and you know how I was through the whole White Rabbit gimmick, but that was the point where he was also dropping riddles in all of his promos.
Yeah,
and he was begging his fans, follow me.
Yeah.
See if you can tell where I'm going.
You know, first
follow
it was
the
follow
buzzards.
the buzzards.
Right.
Then it turned into let me in.
Right.
I mean, still, two completely different characters, even three if you count the feed, but the message was still there. It started off with follow the buzzards, follow what I'm telling you.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden it was like, okay, now we're here. Let me in.
Yep.
Now I was like, wait a minute. Then when you let him in, now all of a sudden you got the feed. Then it was run.
You like run.
Yeah, now you're like, wow. I mean, but it just goes to prove all unrelated characters. Now, the Fiend and Bray Wyatt, Funhouse Bray were obviously related, but they weren't at all related to the Wyatt family. But the story still stayed the same. He was still taking you down that long-term storytelling. Yep. You followed him. Now you're going to let him in. Oh, hell, now you done let him in. You better run because now you done let in the wrong one this time.
And so now we get into the part where it was two of the biggest travesties that ever really happened in the Bray Wyatt saga with the WWE.
So we talked about that. That was Husky Harris. That was the biggest travesty of all time.
I agree it was big, but I think there was two bigger ones.
Okay.
The fact that they put the belt on him as the Fiend. He didn't need the belt. He did not need the belt at all.
Oh no, I think we're gonna disagree on that one a little bit, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So did he need the belt for storyline purposes? No. But when they gave him the belt at that time, the Fiend was the highest merch seller in the WWE, and if you remember, they made a custom Fiend belt that was hideous looking, and they sold a lot of them. And they charged more than every other replica belt that they were selling.
And they're still selling a lot.
Absolutely. They, we're replica collectors. We talk to a lot of you guys that are collectors. We know most belts are about $400 or $500 at max. That Fiend belt was like $799.
Yeah.
$800. And they were selling it off the charts. Like it was gone every time you would go to look. So did the Fiend need the belt for TV purposes? No. But when it was time to sell them belts for $800 a whop, yep, he needed it. Absolutely he did. If I'm WWE, I'd have put it on him again and sell more belts.
And then the second biggest travesty, they fired and let him go.
Yeah, so now
that makes no sense.
Yeah, you're not gonna get an argument out of me for that one because I understand the belt thing. I get that, but the letting him go thing, we've heard a lot of different rumors about. Obviously, nobody knows what the actual case is, but at least not on podcasts. The only people that really know ain't talking. So
right.
We'll never know. But the rumors that we all heard was, he just couldn't get along with Vince McMahon. They couldn't come together on a storyline. I believe that, to a certain extent because of how creative he was and how, much range he found. I don't think they found that much range in that character. And I think it kind of showed itself to prove. Like you said, when he won the belt, it was a lackluster title run, right. Because that's a character that's really, really hard to manage with a title.
Well, I mean, he's invincible. So taking the title back off of him is...
Exactly. Like if you remember when The Undertaker was invincible, he won the title and kept it for 4 days. And then he never won it again until, that whole stage was done.
Right.
And he was about 6 or 7 years later on in his career. Putting it on the feed when you did it, again, it's a merch opportunity. It's going to put a lot of eyes on the product. But as far as the television wrestling, where do you go from here? Like who's going to put down the invincible character? So... they tried it twice, and it like they went into it once and said, hey, it ain't going to work. And they tried. So to my take of it, they did try with him, but I feel like they just couldn't get it together, if that makes sense. And that's unfortunate.
So if anything, going back into some nerd culture here for a minute, if anything, looking at Joker, looking at Lex Luthor, those people like that, they never really needed or had to win in order to be big and over.
Right.
Because they were the nemesis. They were the ultimate villain to the greatest superheroes, right?
Yeah.
That's all they had to do with The Fiend. That's all they had to do. And it didn't matter if he lost. As long as he picked up some wins here and there.
Yeah.
But if he lost the big titles and the big main events, okay, you weren't, at that point when he was The Fiend, he was Teflon.
Yeah.
You weren't going to hurt him.
Right.
I mean, that's really all they had to do. And again, armchair quarterback in here, but we are the Booker's Alliance. That's
Absolutely.
what we do. So
that's what we do. We tell you how it should have been or how it could have been.
Right. So they wound up letting him go, and he is gone. And I mean, gone, as in like.
Well, before we get to that point, we got it. There's one more point. You know, while he was still there, remember. While he was still there, he had the storyline with Alexa and Randy Orton and all that. Remember, they burned him, you know, on live TV.
So there was a chicken fried crispy version.
Yeah, they burned his carcass, you know, right on TV. Dropped him with an RKO and set that man aflame.
Randy murdered a man on live
Absolutely,
TV.
on live TV, burned him to a crisp. I mean, he basically cremated the Fiend right on live TV. And Alexa Bliss stood there and cheered while it happened. You know, she cried or whatever. And then she came out and set Randy Orton on fire. And it's like, you know, what do they say? When you play with fire, you're bound to get burned. But, you know, I wanted to bring that up because, again, you know, he was elevating Alexa and Randy Orton in that part for that. But another place where he elevated, you know, he raised up another guy was Roman Reigns.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Roman Reigns was a fan favorite. Roman Reigns was, you know, supposed to be the next coming of Hulk Hogan, the next coming of John Cena. That's what Vince seemed to have in his mind for Roman Reigns. Pushed him as hard of a baby face as I've seen anybody pushed in my 35 some odd years of watching wrestling. And it wasn't working. I mean, it just was not working. I heard an interview somewhere since Bray passed that they had him talking to, he was doing some kind of interview before his WrestleMania match against The Undertaker. And somebody just asked him, they said, you know, The Undertaker's kind of on the back nine of his career. You know, who do you see as being that guy coming up? You know, if you had to say anybody else but you. Without a hesitation, he didn't even think to say himself. He said Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
He said Roman Reigns is going to be that guy that carries us all into the next millennium. He said he's going to be the guy that puts food on everybody else's table for a long, long time. And this was 2012.
Yep.
I mean, Roman Reigns didn't come back with his whole head of the table gimmick and all that until 2020. That was, 8 years later or something like that. I might have the years screwed up in there somewhere, but it was a long time before we got the head of the table where Roman actually started saying, I'm here to put food on y'all's tables. I'm keeping this place running, blah, blah, blah. And then when it was time for him to ascend off into that new character that he gave, who did he win that title off of?
He won it off Bray.
He won it off not only Bray, he won it off the Fiend.
Fiend.
The same character that we're talking about is indestructible, is unbeatable, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they did it with Goldberg, but I mean, hey, mistakes happen. You know, that was Goldberg. They tried to go down the same old beaten path of Goldberg, and it failed. But when they had the time to take the reset button and they reset it, and went back to the Fiend, and he put over Roman in the reign that we're still living through right now. So the last the last universal heavyweight champion that we got before what we have currently was Bray Wyatt. And he basically anointed Roman into the character that he's become now. And here we are 3 years later, living exactly what Bray Wyatt said 8 years later would be coming to true.
Yep. So moving along.
Didn't want to let that part go without being said.
You're good, but we are short on time, so we got to start wrapping here. But as we got into the resurgence, the second coming of Bray Wyatt, if you will, we got into the follow the rabbit gimmick.
Yep.
Which is probably the best gimmick and return that I have ever seen. Generated so much interest, generated a new way of chasing a storyline, communication with the QR codes.
You had grown men. I mean, we're grown men. You had grown men checking QR codes.
I was chasing everything
on wrestling TV. You know, so now not only are you appealing to the kids that always watch or the long-term fans that always watch, now you got parents and all that involved because they got to go read these QR codes to these kids. You got people who never watch it sitting here intently watching it like, hey, we got to be ready for this QR code because it can happen at any time.
But chasing the rabbit, so to speak, as far as playing the song that was played on the live events, just the way that was all built up until the actual return where you saw the Funhouse puppets kind of live and in person in the arena. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way, very creative way to return.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I believe in this day and age, a return like that just doesn't work because they wanted to progress it slow. They wanted to slow burn it. And unfortunately, the fans just, they were hanging in there, but they weren't buying the slow burn.
Now, people's attention spans aren't built for that anymore. We're in the Netflix era now, where everything's right at the touch of a button, and everybody got to a point where they already kind of knew, the word was pretty much out that this is a return of Bray Wyatt. So, restlessness set in, and everybody said, why are we stalling it? Let's just bring him back. So they brought him back and kind of hot shot him into an angle with LA Knight, and, and that kind of was what it was, and it served its purpose to get him back in the ring.
I will say though, even though I know that people shit on that match a lot, dude, the way he looked in that match, so freaking creative. Yeah, with the black light paint, just,
right. I mean, knowing they had to do the whole Mountain Dew gimmick anyway, so then he's like, hey, I could be sad about it, I could cry about it, or I could live into it, and he lived into it. So,
and that was
he introduced Uncle Howdy. He was on his way to potentially introducing Alexa Bliss again. Before everything took its turn. There was a lot more ways that he was on his way to elevating more characters. Just we got cut short on time.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate. Nobody is guaranteed tomorrow, and unfortunately, his time was cut short with us. And, whether you believe in God, the afterlife, or whatever you want to believe, he was called home, and that's the last we'll get to see of him, unfortunately.
Yeah. Unfortunately, as we talk about that, it's kind of rough, but pretty much the last image I remember of him in wrestling is when The Undertaker kind of gave him that, at that Raw anniversary show, he kind of gave him that pep talk on the way out of the ring. Now, we don't want to get too deep into the Delta here, but Undertaker may have been telling him, I'll see you soon, but we'll see how that turns out.
We'll grab a beer in the bag.
Yeah, he told him, I'll see you, I'll be talking to you in a few months here, but whatever he told him, he was basically telling Bray, hey, it's on you now. And, we weren't able to live into that, but the mark that Bray left on the business is going to hold strong for quite a long time. Yep.
So we want to kind of wrap this up here with, again, paying our respects to Windham Rotunda, Bray Wyatt. The mark you made on all of us wrestling fans will live forever. It's just amazing what you were able to do in the short amount of time that we had you. And we are so glad that we let you in.
Yep. We definitely want to send our appreciations. And whenever we think about you in the back of our minds, secretly, we're going to run.
Absolutely. So with that, everybody, thank you for joining the Bookers Alliance podcast today. Again, not to be very sappy, but hug your loved ones. You never know how much time you got with them.
Yep, definitely. And I mean, we appreciate you guys, all you listeners and whatnot. So, you made it through 50 with us. We got 50 more coming. So we'll look forward to see you guys soon.
Absolutely. And with that, everybody, we bid you adieu.
Peace.
Today's podcast was produced by SBP. You can find our podcast on all major podcast platforms. Also connect with us on our social media accounts. Search for the Bookers Alliance on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.